I never thought a single boardroom meeting could destroy a man's entire career. But watching my CEO's face crumble as I exposed his $1 million lie, that was the moment I knew justice had finally won. My name is Rachel Moreno. I'm 34 years old, and I've worked in corporate marketing for nearly a decade. But before I continue with this story that changed everything, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe to join us for more stories like this one. Subscribe if you believe in fairness and justice, because honestly, only those who don't believe people should be held accountable for their lies would refuse to hit that button. Now, let me tell you how I brought down the most arrogant CEO I've ever met. Picture this. You're sitting in the most important meeting of your career, watching your boss take credit for work that doesn't even exist. Your heart is pounding so hard you can hear it in your ears. Your palms are sweating, and you're holding onto a pen so tightly your knuckles have gone completely white, because you know that in the next 5 minutes, this man is about to destroy everything you've worked for your entire professional life. That was me 3 months ago. Rachel Moreno, the quiet marketing manager who always stayed late, always met the impossible deadlines, always made sure every detail was perfect. I was the type of employee who kept everything running behind the scenes while others took the spotlight. My friends called me meticulous, but at work, that just made me invisible. And my boss absolutely loved it that way. See, invisibility can be dangerous in corporate America. When you're the person who dots every I and crosses every T, when you're the one who turns vague executive dreams into actual strategies, when you're reliable to a fault, well, that makes you the perfect scapegoat. And I was about to find that out in the most brutal way possible. The villain of this story is a man named Ethan Cole. Picture someone in his late 40s, tall, always wearing suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had this permanent smirk, like he knew something you didn't, like he was always 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. But here's the thing about Ethan, he wasn't actually smart. He was just shameless. Ethan had built his entire career on a simple strategy. Steal other people's ideas, present them as your own, and if anyone questions you, make them feel stupid for asking. He thrived on it. The applause, the recognition, the fat bonus checks that came from his brilliant campaigns. And if you tried to point out that maybe, just maybe, you were the one who actually came up with that brilliant idea, he'd cut you off with that condescending little laugh. Like a teacher humoring a child who just said something adorable, but completely wrong. But this story isn't just about stolen credit or workplace politics. This is about a lie so massive, so audacious, that it could have destroyed not just my career, but the entire company. We're talking about a fake product launch worth over $1 million. A launch that existed only in PowerPoint presentations and Ethan's imagination. A launch that he was about to blame on me when it inevitably collapsed. And the most terrifying part? I was the only one who knew it was all fake. For months, I'd been asking the right questions. Where were the prototypes? What about the supply chain? Had we actually tested this product with real customers? Every time I brought up these concerns, Ethan would wave his hand dismissively and say something like, "Relax, Rachel. Investors just need to believe in the vision." But vision doesn't pay the bills. Vision doesn't create actual products. And when you promise investors $1 million launch that's supposedly just days away, vision becomes fraud. I should have spoken up earlier. I should have refused to let my name be attached to this fantasy. But here's what they don't teach you in business school. When your boss is charismatic and you're just the quiet person in the corner, people tend to believe him over you. Even when you're telling the truth. Especially when you're telling the truth. So there I was, trapped between 2 impossible choices. Stay quiet and watch my reputation get destroyed when the lie inevitably came to light. Or speak up and risk being crushed by someone with infinitely more power than me. Either way, my career was over. Or so I thought. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, staring out at the city lights, something changed inside me. Maybe it was the memory of Ethan's smirk as he tossed my name around, like a shield for his scam. Maybe it was the realization that I'd spent years letting people walk all over me. Or maybe it was just pure, white-hot anger finally boiling over. Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't let this slide. Not this time. I had the emails. I had the timelines. I had every piece of evidence needed to prove that his so-called $1 million launch was nothing but smoke and mirrors. And once I made up my mind to use that evidence, there was no turning back. Ethan thought he was untouchable. He had no idea what was coming for him. Let me start by telling you who I really was before all this happened, because understanding my journey makes what comes next so much more impactful. I didn't just stumble into marketing by accident. 10 years ago, fresh out of college with a business degree and more ambition than experience, I landed my first job at a small advertising agency in downtown Chicago. I was 24, eager to prove myself, and absolutely convinced I was going to change the world through brilliant campaigns and innovative strategies. Those early years were brutal. I'm talking 14-hour days, working weekends, surviving on coffee and determination. While my college friends were out enjoying their 20s, I was hunched over my laptop at midnight, perfecting presentations that my boss would present to clients the next morning. But I didn't mind. I was learning, growing, building something. My first real breakthrough came during my third year at the agency. We were working with a struggling restaurant chain, and everyone was stuck. The creative team couldn't crack the campaign. The account managers were panicking, and the client was ready to walk. That's when I noticed something in the data that everyone else had missed. The restaurant's most loyal customers weren't families or business professionals like we'd assumed. They were college students who came in late at night to study. I spent an entire weekend building a strategy around that insight. Study fuel for night owls, 24/7 Wi-Fi, discounted coffee after 9 p.m., quiet study zones. The campaign was a massive success. Sales increased by 37% in the first quarter alone. And you know who got the credit? My boss, at the client presentation at the industry awards ceremony in the trade publications. I was mentioned as part of the team, if I was mentioned at all. But here's the thing about being naturally meticulous and detail-oriented. You adapt. You learn that recognition isn't everything. You focus on building your skills, your network, your reputation among the people who actually matter. The account executives who knew I was the one solving their problems. The clients who specifically requested to work with me, even if they had to go through my boss to do it. Over the next 7 years, I moved through 3 different agencies, each time taking on bigger responsibilities, more complex campaigns. I developed a reputation for being the person who could take impossible deadlines and somehow make them happen. The one who would catch the tiny errors that could destroy entire campaigns. The problem solver who worked magic behind the scenes. My colleagues started calling me the fix. Not to my face, of course, but I heard it through the office grapevine. When a campaign was falling apart, when a client was about to walk, when nobody could figure out why the numbers weren't adding up, they'd quietly slip the problem over to Rachel. And somehow, someway, I'd figure it out. That reputation led me to TechVantage, the startup where this whole nightmare began. They recruited me specifically because they needed someone who could handle chaos, someone who could build marketing strategies for products that were still being developed, someone who could work with brilliant but scattered entrepreneurs who had amazing ideas, but no clue how to sell them. TechVantage was supposed to be different. It was smaller, more intimate. Only about 40 employees when I joined. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where we'd have beer Fridays and team building retreats. The kind of place where hard work would finally be recognized, where I could step out of the shadows and really make an impact. And for the first few months, it was everything I'd hoped for. I was the senior marketing strategist, working directly with the product development team, building campaigns from the ground up. I had a real voice in meetings, real influence over company direction. For the first time in my career, I felt visible. That's when I met Ethan Cole. Ethan wasn't there when I was hired. He came in 6 months later as the new CEO, brought in by the board to take the company to the next level. The previous CEO had been one of the founders, a brilliant engineer who was amazing at building products, but struggled with the business side of things. The board felt they needed someone with more corporate experience, someone who could attract serious investors and scale the company rapidly. On paper, Ethan was perfect for the job. MBA from Wharton, 15 years of experience at Fortune 500 companies, a track record of successful exits. He was tall, probably 6'3", with perfectly styled salt and pepper hair and a wardrobe that screamed expensive taste. Designer suits, Italian leather shoes, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't just his appearance that commanded attention. Ethan had this presence, this magnetic confidence that made people want to follow him. When he walked into a room, conversation stopped. When he spoke, everyone listened. He had this way of making big, sweeping statements about the future of technology and innovation that made you believe he could actually make them happen. His first all-hands meeting was like watching a masterclass in corporate charisma. He stood at the front of our little conference room, no notes, no slides, just pure confidence, and painted this incredible vision of where TechVantage was headed. We were going to revolutionize how businesses manage their digital infrastructure. We were going to be the next big acquisition target for Google or Microsoft. We were going to make everyone in that room wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. I remember walking out of that meeting feeling genuinely excited for the first time in months. Finally, we had a leader who could match the technical brilliance of our products with business acumen that could actually get us noticed. But it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. The first red flag came during my second week of working directly with Ethan. I'd spent 3 days putting together a comprehensive market analysis for our new cloud security product. 20 pages of research, competitive analysis, customer personas, pricing strategies, the works. I was proud of it. It was some of the best work I'd ever done. I presented it to Ethan in his office on a Tuesday morning. He barely glanced at the document, flipping through pages while checking his phone, nodding occasionally with that practiced executive nod that means they're not really listening. "Great work, Rachel," he said, closing the folder. "Really insightful stuff. I'll take it from here." 2 days later, I'm sitting in a client presentation, watching Ethan present my entire analysis as if it were his own original research. Not my team developed, not we discovered, just I found and my analysis shows. He'd even had his assistant reformat the slides to remove my name from the header. When I confronted him about it later, he gave me this patronizing smile and said, "Rachel, that's how business works. Ideas belong to the company, and as CEO, I represent the company. Don't worry. Your contributions are noted internally." Noted internally. Like I was some entry-level intern grateful for the experience. But what could I do? File a complaint with HR against the CEO? Demand credit in front of clients? I was a marketing manager at a startup fighting for survival. Ethan was the golden boy brought in to save the company. The board loved him. The investors loved him. And honestly, part of me wondered if maybe I was being too sensitive, if this really was just how corporate politics worked at this level. So I swallowed my pride and got back to work. And Ethan's pattern became clear pretty quickly. He'd sweep into meetings 5 minutes late, always carrying his phone like he was handling some crucial business deal. He'd scan the room while someone else was presenting, then interrupt with questions that showed he hadn't been listening at all. But somehow he'd always managed to extract the key insights, repackage them in his own words, and present them as if they were his original thoughts. It was masterful in a deeply disturbing way. He had this talent for taking complex technical concepts and distilling them into simple, compelling narratives. The problem was they weren't his concepts. They belonged to the engineers, the product managers, the marketing team. They belonged to me. And the money side of things became obvious pretty quickly too. Ethan negotiated himself a salary that was reportedly 3 times what the previous CEO had been making, plus equity, plus performance bonuses tied to funding milestones. He started flying first class to conferences, staying at 5-star hotels, hiring expensive consultants for projects that the internal team could have handled easily. But the board didn't seem to mind, because Ethan was delivering on his promises. Within his first 6 months, he'd secured a Series B funding round worth $12 million. He was getting TechVantage mentioned in major tech publications. He was building partnerships with companies that previously wouldn't have returned our phone calls. The problem was, I was starting to realize that a lot of these successes were built on promises that might be impossible to keep. TechVantage had always been a pressure cooker environment, but under Ethan's leadership, the stress levels became absolutely insane. Every week brought new investor meetings, new demos, new deadlines that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The product development team was working around the clock, trying to hit milestones that marketing had promised without consulting them first. And somehow, I found myself at the center of all of it. My role evolved rapidly from marketing strategist to crisis manager. When a demo failed during an investor presentation, I was the one who had to figure out how to spin it positively. When clients complained that promised features weren't ready, I was the one who had to craft apology emails and revise timelines. When the press started asking technical questions that Ethan couldn't answer, he'd bring me in as our technical marketing expert to handle the difficult questions. I was working 70-hour weeks, managing campaigns for products that were still theoretical, building marketing strategies around features that existed only in PowerPoint presentations. My personal life completely disappeared. I canceled dates, missed family dinners, spent weekends in the office while Ethan was playing golf with potential investors. But I told myself it was worth it. This was my chance to really prove myself, to build something significant, to finally get the recognition I deserved. TechVantage was growing rapidly, and if we could pull off this next phase of expansion, I'd be positioned as a senior marketing executive at a major tech company. All those years of invisibility would finally pay off. I had my eye on a house in Lincoln Park, nothing crazy expensive, but a real home where I could finally feel stable and secure. I'd been saving for years, living in a tiny studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda, putting every extra dollar toward building the kind of financial foundation that would let me take bigger career risks. My industry reputation was growing too. Other marketing professionals were starting to know my name, not just as someone at TechVantage, but as Rachel Moreno, the strategist who could handle complex B2B campaigns. I was getting LinkedIn messages from recruiters, speaking invitations from industry conferences, the kind of professional recognition that takes decades to build. But all of that was contingent on TechVantage's success. And TechVantage's success was increasingly dependent on promises that I wasn't sure we could keep. The investor meetings were becoming more frequent and more intense. Every month, it seemed like we were pitching to new venture capital firms, promising bigger returns, faster growth, more revolutionary products. And every time, Ethan would paint these incredible pictures of what we were building, using technical details and market projections that I developed, but presented with a confidence that made me deeply uncomfortable. Because here's what the investors didn't know, what Ethan glossed over in his presentations. Half the products we were promising didn't actually exist yet. They were concepts, wireframes, early-stage prototypes that might work if everything went perfectly. But Ethan presented them as if they were production ready, as if we were just waiting to flip a switch and revolutionize entire industries. The next big thing that kept getting mentioned in every investor pitch was something Ethan called Cloud Sync Enterprise. According to his presentations, it was a comprehensive digital infrastructure management platform that would allow businesses to seamlessly integrate all their cloud services, automate their security protocols, and reduce their IT costs by up to 40%. It sounded incredible. It sounded revolutionary. It sounded like exactly the kind of product that would justify the $100 million valuation that Ethan was suggesting to investors. The problem was Cloud Sync Enterprise didn't exist. I know, because I was supposedly the person leading the marketing campaign for it. For months, I'd been asking basic questions about this miraculous product. When could I see a demo? Who were the beta customers? What did the user interface look like? Where were the case studies showing those amazing cost savings? Every time I brought up these concerns, Ethan would give me that dismissive wave and some variation of his favorite phrase. Don't worry about the details, Rachel. Investors just need to believe in the vision. But I'm a marketing professional, not a magician. You can't build a campaign around a vision. You need features, benefits, proof points, real customer testimonials. You need something that actually exists. And slowly, horribly, I started to realize that this wasn't just poor project management or overly optimistic timelines. This was deliberate deception. The supply chain questions I kept asking, there was no supply chain because there was no product to manufacture. The prototype demonstrations I kept requesting, there were no prototypes because the engineering team had never actually been asked to build them. The beta customer feedback I needed for the campaign? There were no beta customers because there was nothing to test. Ethan was selling investors on a completely fictional product, and somehow I was supposed to create marketing materials that would make that fiction feel real. But it gets worse, because as the launch date for CloudSync Enterprise got closer, as the pressure from investors intensified, as the promised demos and deliverables became impossible to ignore, I started to notice something truly terrifying. My name was showing up in places it had never been before. Internal documents started referring to me as the lead product strategist for CloudSync Enterprise. Client emails mentioned me as the primary contact for technical questions. Ethan started introducing me in meetings as the brilliant mind behind our next major launch. At first, I thought it was recognition. Finally, after months of invisible work, I was getting credit for my contributions. But as the pieces started falling into place, I realized what was actually happening. I was being set up as the fall guy. When CloudSync Enterprise inevitably failed to materialize, when investors started asking hard questions about where their money had gone, when the press began investigating how a company could promise investors a revolutionary product that didn't actually exist, there would need to be someone to blame. And that someone was going to be me. Ethan had been carefully, systematically building a paper trail that would make it look like CloudSync Enterprise was my project, my responsibility, my failure. He'd been positioning himself as the visionary CEO who trusted his marketing team to execute, while documenting my involvement in every email, every meeting, every strategic decision. The emails from investors that had been making my stomach churn for weeks suddenly took on a whole new meaning. They weren't just asking about progress updates or technical specifications. They were creating a record of communication with me personally, establishing me as the primary point of contact for $1 million fraud. Because that's what this was. Fraud. Ethan had taken investor money, promised them revolutionary technology that didn't exist, and was preparing to blame the entire disaster on his marketing manager when the truth inevitably came out. The $1 million price tag wasn't just marketing hyperbole. It was real money. Real investor funds that had been allocated based on promises about CloudSync Enterprise. Money that was being spent on Ethan's salary, his travel expenses, his consultant fees, while the actual product development remained completely fictional. Every day brought new emails from curious investors wanting updates on launch timelines. Client inquiries started pouring in from companies that had heard about CloudSync Enterprise through industry publications and wanted to be early adopters. Industry analysts were reaching out for technical briefings and product demonstrations. And every single one of those emails was being forwarded to me with brief notes from Ethan like, "Rachel, please handle this," or "This is your area of expertise," or "I'll let you take the lead on the technical details." Each message felt like another piece of evidence being compiled for my eventual prosecution. Another data point that would prove I was the person responsible when this house of cards finally collapsed. The worst part was watching Ethan during our all-hands meetings, standing up there with that same magnetic confidence, talking about how proud he was of the team's progress on CloudSync Enterprise, how excited he was about the upcoming launch, how this was going to put TechVantage on the map as a major player in the industry. He'd look right at me during these presentations, giving me these encouraging nods like we were in on this amazing secret together. Like I was his trusted partner in building something revolutionary. The rest of the team would look at me with admiration, thinking I was some kind of genius who was about to deliver a product that would make us all rich and famous. But I knew the truth. There was no product. There was no launch. There was just the elaborate fiction that was about to destroy my career and possibly land me in legal trouble when investigators started tracing where the investor money had actually gone. I was trapped in the most impossible situation of my professional life. I couldn't keep pretending to work on marketing for a product that didn't exist. But I also couldn't expose the fraud without destroying my own career and potentially facing criminal charges for my alleged role in the deception. Every night, I'd go home to my tiny studio apartment, pour myself a glass of wine, and stare out at the Chicago skyline, trying to figure out how I'd ended up in this nightmare. I'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, played by all the rules, and somehow I'd ended up as the designated scapegoat for a man who saw other people's careers as disposable tools for his own advancement. The stress was eating me alive. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, jumping every time my phone buzzed with a new email. My friends started asking if I was okay, but what could I tell them? That I was potentially complicit in investor fraud. That my boss was planning to destroy my life to save his own. I felt completely alone, completely powerless, completely trapped. And that's when Ethan made the biggest mistake of his life. In front of the most important investors our company had ever met, he was about to drag my name through the mud for his fantasy. But he had no idea I'd been documenting everything. What would you have done if your boss was about to destroy your career for their own lie? Let me know in the comments and let's see how this played out. The meeting that would change everything was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 a.m. I remember every single detail about that day because it was the moment my entire world came crashing down. I'd been dreading this presentation for weeks. Meridian Capital Partners, one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in Chicago, was considering a $20 million Series C investment in TechVantage. This wasn't just another pitch meeting. This was the big leagues. The kind of funding round that could transform a scrappy startup into a major player overnight. The night before, Ethan had sent me an email at 11:30 p.m. with the subject line, "Tomorrow's presentation, final version." When I opened the attachment, my blood ran cold. There, on slide 17 of his PowerPoint presentation, was my name in bold letters, Rachel Moreno, Head of Product Strategy, CloudSync Enterprise. Not Marketing Manager, not Campaign Coordinator, Head of Product Strategy for a product that existed only in Ethan's imagination. I stared at that slide until my eyes burned. Head of Product Strategy. He'd given me a fake title for a fake product, making me the official face of $1 million lie. And tomorrow morning, he was going to present me to some of the smartest investors in the city as the brilliant mind who developed their next big acquisition target. I called him immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I sent 3 emails that night asking for clarification, asking to discuss the presentation, asking for 5 minutes to talk through the technical details that investors would inevitably want to know. No response. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I tried his office. His assistant told me he was in back-to-back meetings until the presentation. At 8:30, I caught him in the hallway outside the conference room where we'd be meeting with Meridian Capital. "Ethan, we need to talk about today's presentation. I'm not comfortable with how CloudSync Enterprise is being positioned, and I definitely need to understand why my title has been changed." He barely looked up from his phone. "Rachel, relax. You're overthinking this. Just follow my lead in there and everything will be fine. These investors want to see confidence, not anxiety. But what if they ask specific technical questions? What if they want to see a demo? What if they want to talk to actual customers who've used the product?" That's when he gave me that look. That condescending, patronizing smile that I'd come to hate over the past year. "Trust me, I've been doing this a lot longer than you have. I know how to handle investor meetings. Your job is to nod at the right times and back up what I'm saying. Think you can handle that?" Before I could respond, he was walking into the conference room, leaving me standing in the hallway with my heart pounding and my hands shaking. The Meridian Capital team arrived exactly at 10 a.m. 3 partners, 2 associates, all wearing expensive suits and carrying leather portfolios that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They had that aura of people who controlled massive amounts of money and knew it. Polite but calculating, friendly but constantly evaluating. The lead partner was a woman named Victoria Chin, probably in her early 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that you could feel from across the room. She'd made her reputation investing in early-stage tech companies that later became billion-dollar exits. If Victoria Chin believed in your product, other investors would follow. If she didn't, you were finished. Ethan was in his element. He dominated the room from the moment the meeting started, projecting that magnetic confidence that had fooled so many people for so long. He talked about market opportunities, about technological disruption, about TechVantage's unique position to capitalize on the growing demand for integrated cloud solutions. And then he clicked to slide 17. "I'd like you to meet Rachel Moreno, our head of product strategy and the brilliant mind behind CloudSync Enterprise." Every pair of eyes in the room turned to me. Victoria Chin smiled and nodded approvingly. The other partners started flipping through their notes, looking for information about this product they'd obviously researched before the meeting. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were gripping my pen so tightly that my knuckles had gone completely white. I managed to smile and nod, but inside I was screaming. Ethan launched into his presentation about Cloud Sync Enterprise with the kind of detailed confidence that would have been impressive if any of it had been true. According to his slides, we had 18 months of development behind us. We had 3 major beta customers already seeing 40% cost reductions. We had a product roadmap that would revolutionize how enterprises manage their digital infrastructure. The fake timeline was particularly elaborate. Development had supposedly started in January of the previous year, with alpha testing beginning in September and beta deployment starting this past February. The launch was scheduled for next month, with full market rollout planned for the summer. Every date was specific. Every milestone was detailed. Every claim was backed up with charts and graphs and technical specifications that looked completely legitimate. If I hadn't known better, I would have been convinced that Cloud Sync Enterprise was real. Victoria Chin was taking notes, asking thoughtful questions about our competitive positioning and market penetration strategy. The other partners were nodding along, clearly impressed by what they were hearing. And then came the technical questions. Rachel, Victoria said, turning to me with that sharp smile, "Can you walk us through the integration process? How difficult is it for existing customers to migrate their current infrastructure to your platform?" My mouth went completely dry. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, could practically hear him thinking, just nod and back up what I'm saying. But how do you explain the integration process for a product that doesn't exist? Well, we've designed the system to be as seamless as possible, I managed to say. The migration tools are very user-friendly. Victoria nodded, but I could see something shift in her expression. She was too smart, too experienced not to notice how vague and uncomfortable my answer had been. Another partner jumped in. What about security protocols? How does Cloud Sync Enterprise handle data encryption across multiple cloud platforms? I felt sweat beginning to form on my forehead. Security is obviously a top priority. We've implemented multiple layers of protection. Again, my answer was vague, generic. The kind of non-answer that experienced investors recognize immediately as a red flag. But Ethan smoothly stepped in, deflecting the technical questions with corporate buzzwords and promises to schedule follow-up meetings with our development team to dive deeper into the specifics. He was masterful at redirecting attention away from the details and back to the big picture vision. The important thing to understand, he said with that confident smile, is that we're not just building another software platform. We're creating an entirely new category of enterprise solution. Cloud Sync Enterprise will be to digital infrastructure what Salesforce was to customer relationship management. It was a compelling comparison. The kind of bold statement that makes investors lean forward with interest. And for a moment, I could see that it was working. The room was buying into his vision, his confidence, his promise of revolutionary returns on their investment. But then Victoria asked the question that made my blood freeze. When can we see a live demonstration? The silence in the room lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I watched Ethan's face, saw the briefest flicker of panic before he recovered his composure. Of course, we'd be happy to arrange a demo. Given the sensitive nature of some of the features we're developing, we typically handle those in our secure development environment. Rachel can coordinate with your team to schedule something for next week. And there it was. My name, my responsibility, my reputation being used as collateral for a lie that was about to explode in spectacular fashion. Victoria wrote something in her notebook. Perfect. We'll want to see the core functionality, obviously, but we're particularly interested in seeing those integration capabilities in action. And we'd like to speak with at least 2 of your beta customers directly. Direct customer references, live product demonstrations, technical deep dives with our development team. I knew in that moment that we were finished. There was no way to fake a live demo. There were no beta customers to interview because there were no customers at all. The development team couldn't explain technical specifications for a product they'd never been asked to build. But Ethan just smiled and nodded, as if none of this was a problem. Absolutely. Rachel will coordinate all of that. We're excited to show you what we've built. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of follow-up calls. Victoria Chen gave me her business card, personally, and told me she was looking forward to our demonstration next week. The other partners seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the investment opportunity. As soon as the conference room door closed behind them, I felt like I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to be closing in around me. My chest was tight, my hands were shaking, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Ethan was practically glowing with satisfaction. That went perfectly, he said, loosening his tie. Victoria was completely sold on the vision. I think we're looking at a term sheet within 2 weeks. Ethan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, what have you done? He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if he couldn't understand why I seemed upset. What do you mean? We just nailed the most important pitch meeting in the company's history. There's no product. There's no CloudSync enterprise. There are no beta customers. How are we supposed to demonstrate something that doesn't exist? His expression shifted, became colder, more calculating. Rachel, I need you to calm down. You're being dramatic. Dramatic? They want to see a live demo next week. They want to interview our customers. They want technical specifications for a product that exists only in your PowerPoint slides. That's your job to figure out, he said, his voice taking on that familiar dismissive tone. You're the head of product strategy, remember? I'm sure you'll think of something. And that's when I understood the full scope of what he'd done to me. He'd set me up not just as the fall guy for when the lie collapsed, but as the person responsible for somehow making his fantasy become reality. In his mind, it was my job to either create CloudSync Enterprise from scratch in the next week, or take the blame when it became clear that we defrauded investors out of millions of dollars. I walked out of that conference room in a complete daze. My colleagues were congratulating me on the successful presentation, asking excited questions about the demo next week, talking about what this funding round would mean for all of us. But I felt like I was watching everything through thick glass, like I was disconnected from the world around me. The rest of that day was a blur of follow-up emails from the Meridian Capital team. Victoria Chen's assistant requesting our beta customer contact information. Technical questions about system architecture and security protocols. Requests for detailed product documentation and user manuals. Each email felt like another shovel of dirt being thrown onto my career grave. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out how to respond to requests for information about a product that didn't exist. By 5 p.m., I had 17 unanswered emails from potential investors and clients who'd heard about CloudSync Enterprise through industry channels. Word was spreading quickly about TechVantage's revolutionary new platform, and everyone wanted to be part of the next big thing. The worst part was watching my coworkers' excitement. The engineering team was buzzing about the funding round and what it would mean for their stock options. The sales team was already talking about commission structures for the CloudSync Enterprise launch. Everyone was counting on me to deliver something that would make them all wealthy. And I was the only person in the entire company who knew it was all built on lies. I stayed late that night, long after everyone else had gone home, sitting alone in the empty office and trying to figure out what to do. The city lights stretched out beyond our windows, millions of people going about their normal lives while my world was falling apart in slow motion. I had 2 choices, and both of them were terrible. Choice 1, I could play along with Ethan's deception. I could spend the next week frantically trying to cobble together some kind of demo, create fake customer testimonials, build a facade convincing enough to fool experienced investors for at least long enough to secure the funding. Maybe I could buy us time to actually develop the product after we had their money. But that would make me a criminal. Knowingly defrauding investors out of $20 million isn't a career mistake. It's a federal crime. Even if we somehow managed to build CloudSync Enterprise eventually, I'd be complicit in securities fraud. My career would be over, and I'd probably end up in prison. Choice 2, I could expose the truth. I could tell the investors that CloudSync Enterprise doesn't exist, that they were being lied to, that their due diligence process had been undermined by deliberate deception. But that would also destroy my career. Who would hire a marketing manager who'd been involved in investor fraud, even as a whistleblower? Ethan would undoubtedly claim that I was the one who'd misled him, that I'd promised deliverables I couldn't provide, that the failure was mine alone. And given his charisma and my relative invisibility in the industry, people would probably believe him. Either way, I was finished. I sat there until almost midnight, my chest tight with anxiety, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Years of work, years of sacrifice, years of building a reputation and a career, and it was all about to be destroyed by a man who saw other people as disposable tools for his own advancement. The worst part was replaying every interaction I'd had with Ethan over the past year. Every time he dismissed my concerns, every time he'd stolen credit for my work, every time he'd made me feel small and insignificant. I'd accepted it all because I thought that's how corporate politics worked, because I thought playing along was the price of career advancement. But now I could see the pattern clearly. Ethan had been systematically setting me up for this moment from the beginning. Every stolen idea, every dismissive comment, every time he positioned me as the technical expert while keeping himself at the visionary level, it had all been building toward this. He'd found the perfect scapegoat. The quiet, meticulous marketing manager who worked behind the scenes and rarely got public recognition. Someone competent enough to be believable as the mastermind behind a complex technical product, but not powerful enough to defend herself when everything fell apart. I thought about all the weekends I'd sacrificed for TechVantage, all the family dinners I'd missed, all the personal relationships I'd let slide while pouring everything into building something I believed in. And for what? So that Ethan could gamble with my reputation and my freedom to fund his lifestyle and his ego. The humiliation was almost as bad as the fear. I'd been so proud of finally being recognized, of finally having my expertise acknowledged by being named head of product strategy. But it had all been a setup. My moment of professional recognition was actually the moment I'd been designated as the fall guy for someone else's crime. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victoria Chen's face, saw her excitement about the demo, saw her trust in me as the person who'd built this revolutionary product. I looked her in the eye and nodded along with lies that could cost her firm millions of dollars. And I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's smirk when he told me it was my job to figure out how to make his fantasy real. The casual way he destroyed my life, as if I were just another business expense that could be written off when it was no longer useful. But somewhere around 3 a.m, lying awake in my tiny studio apartment, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there. The humiliation was still burning in my chest. But underneath it all, a different emotion was starting to emerge. Anger. Not the quick flash of irritation I'd felt before when Ethan had been dismissive or condescending. This was something deeper, colder, more focused. This was the kind of anger that comes from finally understanding exactly how you've been manipulated and betrayed. I started thinking about every email I'd sent questioning the CloudSync Enterprise timeline, every meeting where I'd asked for product specifications, every time I'd tried to get clarity about deliverables and been brushed off with vague corporate speak. I'd been documenting my concerns for months without even realizing it. Every time I'd asked a practical question about the product, every time I'd requested technical details, every time I tried to get clarification about timelines and features, it was all there in my email history. And suddenly, I realized something that made me sit up in bed. I had proof. Not just proof that CloudSync Enterprise didn't exist, but proof that I'd been raising concerns about it for months. Proof that I'd been asking the right questions and getting dismissed. Proof that I'd been trying to do my job properly while being systematically misled by my CEO. I got out of bed and opened my laptop, scrolling through months of email exchanges with Ethan. There it was, all laid out in chronological order. My attempts to get product specifications, his vague responses, my request for customer interviews, his promises to set that up later, my questions about development timelines, his assurances that everything was on track. Every email was timestamped. Every conversation was documented. Every instance of me trying to do legitimate marketing work for a product that didn't exist was preserved in my inbox. For the first time since that disastrous investor meeting, I felt something other than despair. I felt power. Ethan thought he was untouchable. He thought his charisma and his position would protect him when this whole scheme inevitably collapsed. He thought he could point the finger at me, and everyone would believe that the quiet marketing manager was somehow responsible for defrauding sophisticated investors. But he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was just going to roll over and accept being destroyed for his benefit. He'd assumed I was the same invisible, compliant employee who'd been letting him steal credit and dismiss my concerns for the past year. He had no idea what was coming. I spent the rest of that night organizing my documentation. Email chains proving I'd been asking about product development for months. Calendar invites for meetings about CloudSync Enterprise that had been canceled or rescheduled indefinitely. Budget requests for marketing materials that had been approved without any corresponding product development expenses. My meticulous, obsessive attention to detail, the same trait that had made me invisible and easy to dismiss, was about to become Ethan's worst nightmare. Because here's what he didn't understand about quiet people like me. We pay attention. We document everything. We ask the right questions and remember the answers. And when someone finally pushes us too far, we have receipts. I had everything I needed to destroy him. Every email, every timeline, every piece of proof that his $1 million launch was pure fiction. But exposing a CEO isn't just about having evidence. It's about timing, strategy, and making sure the truth hits like a freight train. Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and exposing a powerful person? Drop your thoughts below, because what I did next would change both our lives forever. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness, but it was overshadowed by something else entirely. Purpose. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly what I had to do. I got to the office early, before the cleaning crew had even finished. I needed time to think, to plan, to organize everything I'd discovered in those sleepless hours the night before. The evidence was there, scattered across months of emails and documents, but I needed to turn it into something undeniable. Something that would protect me and expose Ethan for exactly what he was. The first thing I did was create a secure folder on my personal cloud storage account, not the company server where IT could delete files or monitor my activity. This had to be completely outside TechVantage's control. I started methodically copying every relevant email, every document, every piece of communication that proved CloudSync Enterprise was a complete fabrication. It was meticulous work, the kind of detailed organization that had always been my strength, but had made me invisible for so long. Now, that same attention to detail was going to be my weapon. I organized everything chronologically, creating a timeline that told the story of how this fraud had developed. January 15th, my first email asking for product specifications. Ethan's response promising to loop me in on the development roadmap soon. March 3rd, my request to interview beta customers. His deflection about scheduling challenges. May 20th, my question about prototype testing. His assurance that everything was proceeding as planned. Month after month of me asking legitimate questions and him providing increasingly vague non-answers. But here's what made it devastating. I wasn't just documenting my concerns. I was documenting his lies. Because in every response, Ethan had claimed that CloudSync Enterprise was real, was progressing, was on track for launch. The email trail didn't just prove that the product didn't exist. It proved that Ethan knew it didn't exist and had been deliberately deceiving me, the board, and investors for months. But I couldn't just dump a pile of emails and expect people to understand the implications. I needed to make this accessible, compelling, impossible to dismiss or deflect. So I started building what I called the case against Ethan Cole. I created a presentation, not unlike the ones I'd built for countless marketing campaigns over the years. But this time, I wasn't selling a product. I was selling the truth. The opening slides established the claims. Screenshots of Ethan's investor presentations showing CloudSync Enterprise's supposed 18-month development timeline, its 3 beta customers, its 40% cost savings, its scheduled launch date. Every specific promise he'd made to secure funding. Then came the evidence. Email after email showing that none of it was true. Budget documents proving no money had been allocated for product development. Meeting minutes where the engineering team discussed completely different projects. Calendar records showing that supposed cloud sync development meetings had never actually happened. The most damning piece was an email chain from just 2 weeks earlier. I'd sent Ethan a detailed list of technical questions that Victoria Chen's team would likely ask during the demo. Questions about system architecture, security protocols, integration capabilities. Basic stuff that anyone who'd actually built the product would be able to answer easily. His response was a masterpiece of revealing incompetence. Don't worry about the technical details. Focus on the big picture vision. If they want specifics, we'll bring in our development team later. Except we didn't have a development team working on Cloud Sync Enterprise, because there was no Cloud Sync Enterprise to develop. As I built the case, I realized I was creating something that went far beyond just this one fake product. The pattern of credit theft, the systematic manipulation, the way Ethan had been positioning me to take the fall, it was all there in the documentation. I found emails where he'd taken strategies I'd developed and presented them as his own ideas. Meeting notes where he'd dismissed my concerns in front of the board, then privately asked me to handle the problems he publicly claimed didn't exist. A paper trail of him building his reputation on my work while simultaneously setting me up to be destroyed when his lies inevitably collapsed. But building the case was only half the battle. I needed to think strategically about how to present it, when to reveal it, and to whom. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan's fraud. It was about protecting myself and ensuring that when the truth came out, I'd be seen as the whistleblower who'd saved the company, not the scapegoat who'd enabled the deception. I spent the entire weekend researching corporate whistleblower protections, legal precedents for securities fraud cases, and the proper channels for reporting suspected investor deception. I wasn't just going to throw accusations around and hope they stuck. I was going to build an airtight case that would be impossible to ignore or deflect. The key was timing. I couldn't reveal everything immediately because that would give Ethan time to craft a defense or find ways to discredit me. But I also couldn't wait too long because every day brought us closer to the scheduled demo with Meridian Capital, and I refused to be complicit in defrauding investors. I decided on a 3-phase approach. Phase 1. Document everything happening in real time. Every conversation with Ethan about the demo. Every request from investors. Every moment where the gap between his promises and reality became undeniable. I needed current evidence to go along with the historical patterns. Phase 2. Identify allies within the company. People who'd witnessed Ethan's behavior, who'd questioned the Cloud Sync timeline, who might be willing to corroborate my account when everything came to light. Phase 3. Choose the perfect moment to reveal everything. Maximum impact, maximum witnesses, minimum opportunity for Ethan to spin the narrative in his favor. The hardest part was acting normal. Going to meetings, responding to emails, pretending that I was actually working on marketing materials for a product that didn't exist. But I forced myself to play the role because any change in my behavior might tip Ethan off that something was wrong. Monday morning brought a flurry of activity around the upcoming demo. Ethan scheduled a Cloud Sync strategy session with the entire marketing team to finalize our presentation approach. I sat in that conference room, watching him stand at the whiteboard and describe features and benefits for a completely fictional product, and I documented every word. He was so confident, so completely convinced of his own brilliance. He talked about positioning strategies and competitive advantages as if he were discussing real technical capabilities. He assigned tasks to team members, updating the product website, preparing marketing collateral, coordinating with customer success to arrange beta customer interviews. None of it could be completed because none of it was real. But Ethan seemed genuinely convinced that somehow, through sheer force of will and corporate buzzwords, he could make Cloud Sync Enterprise materialize in time for the demo. The most revealing moment came when Sarah from the marketing team asked a direct question. Should I reach out to the development team to get some technical screenshots for the website update? Ethan's response was immediate and telling. No, don't bother them right now. They're heads down on some critical performance optimizations. Rachel can handle the technical content. She knows the product better than anyone. Rachel can handle the technical content for a product that didn't exist. It was such a perfect example of how he'd been systematically setting me up to be responsible for his lies. But here's what Ethan didn't realize. I was recording everything. Not literally, but taking detailed notes immediately after every meeting, every conversation, every moment where he doubled down on the deception. My meticulous documentation habits, the same traits that had made me easy to overlook and dismiss, were creating a real-time record of corporate fraud in action. I also started building relationships with potential allies, casual conversations with colleagues who'd seemed uncomfortable during Ethan's presentations, coffee chats with people from other departments who might have insights into the company's actual product development priorities. What I discovered was that I wasn't the only one who'd noticed problems. Jake from the engineering team had been quietly questioning why he'd never been briefed on CloudSync development. Lisa from finance had raised concerns about budget allocations that didn't match the supposed product roadmap. Mike from customer success had been confused about which clients were supposedly beta testing the platform. None of them had put the pieces together yet, but they'd all noticed inconsistencies. They'd all asked questions and received vague, unsatisfying answers. When the truth finally came out, they'd be able to corroborate that the warning signs had been there all along. The breakthrough came on Wednesday, 3 days before the scheduled demo with Meridian Capital. Ethan called me into his office for what he described as a final strategy alignment meeting. He wanted to review my presentation materials, make sure I was prepared to handle technical questions, coordinate our messaging for the demo. I brought a folder full of marketing collateral I'd created for other products. Generic technical content that looked impressive, but wasn't specific to CloudSync Enterprise. Because what else could I bring? You can't create legitimate marketing materials for a product that doesn't exist. As I sat across from Ethan's desk, watching him flip through pages of content that had nothing to do with what we were supposedly demonstrating, I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. For just a moment, his confidence cracked. I could see him realizing that we were 3 days away from a demo that could secure $20 million in funding, and we had absolutely nothing to show for it. Rachel, he said, setting down the folder, I need to be honest with you about something. The development team has run into some unexpected technical challenges with CloudSync Enterprise. Nothing insurmountable, but the timeline might be more compressed than we originally planned. Unexpected technical challenges. That was his euphemism for the product doesn't exist and never did. What kind of challenges? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Integration issues, mostly. The kind of complex problems that are actually a good sign. They mean we're building something truly innovative. But it might mean we need to adjust our approach for the demo. He was setting up his exit strategy. When the demo inevitably failed, when investors realized they'd been lied to, when the SEC started investigating securities fraud, Ethan would claim that there had been a real product, but it had encountered unexpected technical challenges that his marketing team had failed to communicate properly. And guess who would be blamed for that communication failure? What kind of adjustment are you thinking? I asked. Well, instead of a full functional demo, we might focus more on the strategic vision. Show wireframes, discuss the roadmap, let them understand the market opportunity without getting bogged down in technical details that are still being refined. Wireframes and strategic vision. For a product that was supposedly 18 months into development with 3 beta customers already seeing results. Ethan, I said carefully. Victoria Chin specifically asked for a live demonstration. She wants to see the core functionality in action. Wireframes aren't going to satisfy that request. His mask slipped completely for just a second. I saw panic flash across his face before he recovered his composure. Then we'll give her a live demonstration, he said with forced confidence. You're the technical expert, Rachel. I'm sure you can figure something out. And there it was, the final piece of evidence I needed. He was directly asking me to create a fake demo for a product that didn't exist, to deceive sophisticated investors in order to secure funding for his fraudulent scheme. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I'm asking you to do your job, he replied, his tone becoming sharp and defensive. You're the head of product strategy for CloudSync Enterprise. If you can't figure out how to demonstrate your own product, maybe I overestimated your capabilities. Your own product. He just claimed on record that CloudSync Enterprise was my product, my responsibility, my failure if it couldn't be demonstrated. I nodded and smiled, as if I were accepting his challenge rather than documenting his attempt to make me complicit in securities fraud. I'll figure something out, I said. And I walked out of his office knowing that I finally had everything I needed to destroy him. That night, I finalized my presentation. Not marketing materials for CloudSync Enterprise, but the case against Ethan Cole, a pattern of deception and securities fraud. 53 slides of chronological evidence, email screenshots, budget discrepancies, and timeline contradictions that painted an undeniable picture of deliberate investor deception. But I still needed to choose my moment carefully. The demo was scheduled for Friday morning. If I waited until then, Ethan might find some way to deflect or delay. If I acted too soon, he might be able to craft a defense or rally support from board members who weren't fully aware of the situation. I decided on Thursday afternoon, the weekly board meeting where Ethan would undoubtedly give an optimistic update on tomorrow's demo, where key stakeholders would be present, where the revelation would have maximum impact and minimum opportunity for spin control. I spent Thursday morning acting completely normal. I attended meetings, responded to emails, even had a brief conversation with Ethan about final preparations for the demo. He seemed more relaxed, as if he'd convinced himself that his vague suggestions about wireframes and strategic vision would somehow be sufficient to fool experienced investors. His confidence was about to become his downfall. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. 7 board members, 3 senior executives including Ethan, and me as the CloudSync Enterprise subject matter expert who'd been asked to provide a brief update on demo readiness. I arrived early, set up my laptop, and waited. My hands were steady, my breathing was controlled, and for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. I knew what was about to happen would change everything. For Ethan, for TechVantage, for my own career. But I also knew it was the right thing to do. Ethan walked in at exactly 2 p.m., radiating his usual confidence. He greeted board members warmly, made small talk about the market opportunity, projected optimism about tomorrow's presentation with Meridian Capital. Before we dive into the formal agenda, he said, settling into his chair at the head of the table, I want to give everyone a quick update on our CloudSync Enterprise demo tomorrow. Rachel's done amazing work preparing for this presentation, and I think we're positioned to really wow Victoria Chen's team. Amazing work. Preparing for a presentation about a product that didn't exist. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the comfortable atmosphere of the room, I'd like to address some concerns I have about CloudSync Enterprise before we discuss the demo. Ethan's smile flickered slightly, but he maintained his composure. Of course, Rachel. What's on your mind? I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. I've been reviewing our development timeline and investor commitments, and I've identified some significant discrepancies that I think the board needs to be aware of. The first slide appeared on the wall-mounted screen. CloudSync Enterprise, a timeline of deception. The room went completely silent. Ethan's face went white. Rachel, what are you doing? I'm doing my job, I replied calmly. My job as head of product strategy is to ensure that our investors receive accurate information about our product development. And based on my analysis, they haven't been. I clicked to the next slide, showing screenshots from Ethan's investor presentation claiming 18 months of development work. According to the materials presented to Meridian Capital Partners, CloudSync Enterprise has been in development since January of last year. But when I reviewed our actual budget allocations, engineering schedules, and project management records, I found no evidence that this development has actually occurred. Board members started shifting in their seats, looking confused and concerned. The chairman, Robert Martinez, leaned forward with a frown. Rachel, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that CloudSync Enterprise doesn't exist, I said simply. It never has existed. And tomorrow's demo is supposed to showcase a product that is entirely fictional. Ethan stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Rachel, You're clearly confused about the development process. Maybe we should discuss this privately. Actually, I think the board deserves to see the evidence I've compiled. I clicked through slide after slide of documentation. Emails where I'd asked for product specifications and received evasive responses. Budget documents showing no cloud sync development expenses. Meeting minutes from engineering team sessions where the product was never mentioned. Calendar records proving that supposed development meetings had never been scheduled. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Confusion became concern, became outright alarm as the implications became clear. These are internal communications between Ethan and myself over the past 8 months, I explained as email screenshots filled the screen. You can see that I've been consistently asking questions about Cloud Sync enterprise development, and the responses have been consistently vague and non-committal. Board member Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. Are you saying that we've been reporting progress on a product that doesn't actually exist? That's exactly what I'm saying. And I have documentation proving that Ethan has known this throughout the entire timeline. I showed them the email from 2 weeks ago where Ethan had dismissed technical questions as unimportant, focusing instead on big picture vision. I showed them budget requests that had been approved for marketing Cloud Sync Enterprise, while no corresponding funds had been allocated for actual development. Most damning of all, I showed them the conversation from yesterday where Ethan had directly asked me to create a fake demo to deceive investors. Yesterday, when I asked Ethan how we were supposed to demonstrate a product that doesn't exist, he told me to figure something out. He explicitly asked me to create false marketing materials to deceive Meridian Capital Partners into investing $20 million in a fictional product. Ethan was frantically trying to interrupt, to explain, to regain control of the narrative. But every time he spoke, I had documentation that contradicted his claims. The development team encountered technical challenges, he insisted. Rachel is taking things out of context. I clicked to a slide showing the engineering team's actual project schedule for the past 18 months. Cloud Sync Enterprise wasn't mentioned anywhere. The challenges were external factors, he tried again. Market conditions required us to adjust our approach. I showed budget allocations proving that no money had ever been spent on Cloud Sync development, even as marketing expenses for the fictional product had been approved and spent. Every excuse he offered, I had evidence to refute. Every attempt to deflect blame, I had emails proving his direct involvement in the deception. Every effort to minimize the scope of the fraud, I had investor commitments showing millions of dollars at stake. The board members weren't just concerned anymore. They were horrified. Robert Martinez finally spoke, his voice heavy with the implications of what he'd just learned. Ethan, are you telling me that we've been presenting false information to potential investors? It's not false information, Ethan said desperately. It's forward-looking strategy. It's vision-based planning. Every startup operates on projections and future possibilities. Projections based on real development work, Jennifer Walsh replied sharply. Not fantasies presented as accomplished facts. I clicked to my final slide. Immediate actions required. Based on this evidence, I said, I recommend that tomorrow's demo with Meridian Capital be immediately canceled, that we contact all investors who've received Cloud Sync Enterprise presentations to provide accurate information, and that we conduct a full internal investigation to determine the extent of the misinformation that's been communicated. The room erupted. Board members were talking over each other, demanding answers, expressing shock and anger about the legal and financial implications of what they'd just learned. Ethan was frantically trying to regain control, claiming that I was disgruntled, that I was misrepresenting normal business practices, that my concerns were overblown. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, the documentation was undeniable, and the board could see exactly what had been happening. Robert Martinez called for an immediate executive session. Ethan, I need you to step out while the board discusses this situation. This is my company, Ethan protested. I'm not going anywhere. Actually, Robert replied coldly, it's the shareholders' company. And based on what we've just learned, your continued presence is a liability we can't afford. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. Your access to company systems and facilities is suspended immediately pending a full investigation. I watched Ethan's face as the reality of his situation finally sank in. The confidence, the arrogance, the smug certainty that he could manipulate his way out of any problem. It all crumbled in real time. He looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done to yourself, Rachel. No one will ever trust you again. You've destroyed your own career. No, I replied quietly. I saved it. Security arrived within minutes to escort Ethan from the building. As he was walked past the conference room window, I could see other employees gathering in the hallway, whispering among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. The board spent the next 3 hours in emergency session, reviewing every document I'd provided, calling emergency meetings with legal counsel and auditing firms, beginning the massive process of damage control that would be required to protect the company and its legitimate stakeholders. I was asked to stay, to provide additional context, to help them understand the full scope of what had been happening. For the first time in my career, I was the most important person in the room, not because of my title or my position in the hierarchy, but because I had the information and integrity that could save the company. Jennifer Walsh pulled me aside as the meeting was ending. Rachel, I want you to understand how serious this situation could have been. If you hadn't come forward, if we'd proceeded with that demo tomorrow, we could be looking at criminal charges for securities fraud. You potentially saved this company and everyone who works here. As I finally left the office that evening, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the nightmare was finally over. Vindication that my months of concern and documentation had been validated. Exhaustion from the stress and intensity of everything that had happened. But underneath it all, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, pride. Not just professional satisfaction, but genuine pride in having done the right thing despite enormous personal risk. The news spread quickly through the industry. By Monday morning, tech blogs were reporting on Ethan's sudden departure from TechVantage amid strategic disagreements with the board. The full details wouldn't become public until the SEC investigation concluded, but word traveled fast through professional networks that something significant had happened. My phone started ringing immediately. Recruiters who'd heard that the whistleblower who saved TechVantage was potentially available. Former colleagues who wanted to understand what had really happened. Industry professionals who respected what I'd done and wanted to explore potential collaborations. For the first time in my career, I wasn't invisible. My name was associated with integrity, courage, and the kind of meticulous professionalism that companies desperately needed. The same traits that had made me easy to overlook and dismiss had ultimately become my greatest professional assets. TechVantage's board asked me to stay on as interim head of marketing while they conducted their search for new leadership. They wanted someone they could trust, someone who'd proven their commitment to transparency and honest dealing with stakeholders. The Meridian Capital demo was canceled, obviously, but Victoria Chen reached out personally to express her appreciation for the honesty. It takes tremendous courage to do what you did, she told me over the phone. That kind of integrity is exactly what we look for in potential portfolio companies. When TechVantage is ready to raise funding again, we'd be very interested in continuing our conversations. The SEC investigation took 6 months to complete. When the final report was published, it confirmed everything I'd documented and more. Ethan hadn't just created one fictional product. He'd been systematically misrepresenting TechVantage's capabilities and financial position to investors for over a year. He was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit investor deception. The trial received significant coverage in the business press, partly because it was such a clear-cut case of startup fraud, but mostly because of how it had been exposed. The hero who saved her company was the headline in TechCrunch. Forbes ran a piece called Why Every Company Needs a Rachel Moreno. Harvard Business Review published a case study on corporate whistleblowing that used my experience as a model for how integrity and documentation can protect both individuals and organizations. Ethan's conviction resulted in a 4-year federal prison sentence and permanent banishment from serving as an officer or director of any public company. His professional reputation was destroyed completely. The network of contacts and relationships he'd built over decades in the tech industry evaporated overnight. But the personal satisfaction wasn't really about his punishment. It was about the vindication. For years, I'd accepted being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as if my contributions didn't matter. I convinced myself that this was just how corporate politics worked, that speaking up would only make things worse for me. The truth was exactly the opposite. Speaking up, documenting everything, refusing to be complicit in deception, that's what had saved my career and transformed my professional life. 6 months after Ethan's departure, TechVantage completed a successful Series C funding round led by Meridian Capital Partners. This time, the investor presentations were based on real products, real customers, and real financial data that had been independently audited and verified. I was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer with equity compensation that would make me financially secure for the first time in my life. More importantly, I had the respect and trust of colleagues, board members, and industry professionals who knew what I'd risk to do the right thing. The house in Lincoln Park that I'd been dreaming about for years, I bought it with cash from my equity payout when TechVantage was acquired by Microsoft 18 months later. The acquisition was based on our legitimate technology and real market traction, not fictional products and fraudulent promises. But the material rewards weren't really the point. The point was that I'd learned something fundamental about my own power and worth. For too many years, I'd accepted other people's assessment of my value, let others define my contributions, allowed myself to be invisible because it seemed safer and easier than asserting myself. The experience with Ethan taught me that safety and invisibility are illusions. When someone is determined to exploit you, being quiet and compliant doesn't protect you. It makes you a more attractive target. The only real protection is integrity, documentation, and the courage to speak truth to power when it matters most. I think about that lesson every day now, in my new role as Chief Marketing Officer at a major tech company. When I see young employees being dismissed or overlooked, when I notice patterns of credit theft or manipulation, when I encounter situations where someone in power is taking advantage of someone without it, I speak up. Not because I'm brave or heroic, but because I understand now that speaking up is actually the safest thing you can do. Truth and documentation are the most powerful tools anyone has in a professional environment. And the people who try to convince you otherwise are exactly the people you need to be most careful about. Ethan thought he could destroy me because I was quiet, meticulous, and invisible. He saw those traits as weaknesses that made me an easy target for manipulation and scapegoating. He was wrong. Those same traits, the attention to detail, the careful documentation, the preference for working behind the scenes, those were exactly what allowed me to build an unshakable case against him. My invisibility meant he never saw me coming. My meticulous nature meant I had evidence he never knew existed. My quiet professionalism meant that when I finally spoke up, people listened. Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are the ones most vulnerable to the truth. And sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should fear the most. I just smiled. If you've ever felt invisible at work or had someone steal credit for your efforts, remember this. Your time will come. Document everything. Stay professional and never underestimate the power of the truth. I know it's easy to say that now, after everything worked out for me, but I want you to understand something. I didn't always believe it would. There were so many nights when I lay awake convinced that speaking up would destroy me, that someone like Ethan would always win because he had more power, more charisma, more connections than I ever would. But here's what I learned. The quiet ones, the invisible ones, the people who work behind the scenes and pay attention to details, we have a superpower that the Ethans of the world never see coming. We see everything. We remember everything. And when we finally decide to act, we have receipts. Your meticulous nature isn't a weakness. Your preference for working behind the scenes isn't a character flaw. Your attention to detail isn't something to be embarrassed about. These are the exact traits that will protect you when someone tries to take advantage of your integrity. I think about all the people who are sitting at their desks right now, dealing with bosses who steal their ideas, colleagues who take credit for their work, or managers who set them up to fail. I think about how alone they must feel, how powerless they must believe they are. And I want them to know that they're not alone and they're not powerless. Every email you send asking reasonable questions, every time you document a concern in writing, every instance where you try to do your job properly and get dismissed or ignored, that's evidence. That's proof. That's your protection when everything inevitably falls apart. Because here's the thing about people like Ethan, they always push too far eventually. They get so confident in their ability to manipulate situations that they stop being careful. They leave trails. They make mistakes. They underestimate the people they're exploiting. And when that moment comes, when they finally overreach and their house of cards starts to collapse, the person with the documentation, the person who asked the right questions, the person who tried to do things properly, that person becomes invaluable. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be flashy to be important. Some of the most significant victories happen quietly, methodically, by people who simply refused to compromise their integrity when it mattered most. What's the biggest workplace injustice you've witnessed? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. That someone else has been through something similar and survived it. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to find the courage to document their situation, to speak up, to protect themselves. And if this story inspired you to stand up for what's right, make sure you subscribe for more stories of people who refuse to stay silent. Hit that notification bell, because justice stories like this one are exactly what we need more of in this world. We need to celebrate the people who choose integrity over convenience, truth over safety, justice over keeping quiet. We need to remind each other that speaking up is worth it, that the right thing is usually the hard thing, and that sometimes the quiet person in the corner is the one who changes everything. Your voice matters. Your documentation matters. Your integrity matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.